There's a new chapter, of course, this morning, 11 of them to be exact, in the Bush 43 presidency. One of his former speechwriters out with a new book, taking readers inside the White House. Contessa bringing us some of the highlights and lowlights. Contessa.
Dylan, Matt Latimer is already facing criticism from the left and from the right about this book. It's called Speechless, Tales of a White House Survivor. In it, Latimer says George W. Bush was not evil or stupid. He just wasn't a good leader. Latimer writes, "You want presidents to fight for things they believe in. That's what I wanted. Maybe I was naive to want that in the first place, but I think that's what people want. And when I saw Washington to be a very different than that, I just felt people needed to know." Well, Latimer's feelings aren't just about what he saw in the White House. In fact, he claims most of Washington is disillusioned. His time in the Beltway has also included stints in the halls of Congress, working for such senators as John Kyle and Mitch McConnell, and he's bringing in, Dylan, a lot of behind-the-scenes information.
All right, Matt joins the meeting right now. Welcome. Nice to see you.
Thank you.
What is your intention in writing this book?
Well, I wanted to give people a glimpse of Washington from a perspective of somebody who came from the middle of the country, Michigan. I advanced and believed in the ideals of the Reagan conservative revolution, and I wanted to come to Washington and help put it to work. And I went to Capitol Hill and Pentagon and the White House at the highest levels, and I wanted people to see from both sides of the aisle what Washington's really like.
Well, what of those who would say it's inappropriate to write the sort of kiss and tell commentary, and then Bush said this about Palin and Bush said this about Obama, and it's intriguing and titillating, and gossip gets people's attention, but is it appropriate?
Well, you know, my book is not just about the Bush administration. It's about my entire experience in Washington. And there are a lot of wonderful traditions of speechwriters and other presidential aides who have written great books about their times with presidents and talking about inside conversations. People like Peggy Noonan, Bill Safire, George Stephanopoulos, members of the Bush administration have done that. Karl Rove and George Bush and Dick Cheney are all going to be writing a book soon that's going to have conversations with the president.
So your argument is it's not that people are concerned with the fact that you're doing it, it's the content that you are releasing. Ezra, I know you got a question. What's going on?
Well, you just had a great story in there, Matt, about around when TARP was being done, and George W. Bush goes and he's trying to explain in his speech, and he can't seem to get it right because he doesn't understand it. And eventually he turns to everybody and he says, "Why am I supporting this policy if I don't understand it?" And I thought that was a really signal moment of the Bush presidency. I was wondering if you could tell us a bit more about what went through your head when you heard it.
Well, actually, the situation was the president was told something that wasn't correct. It wasn't the president didn't understand the legislation. It was that the Treasury Secretary had a different conception of the legislation, was in effect acting on his own.
What legislation was being discussed?
This is the economic...
the TARP?
The TARP package.
This is before the TARP vote. So this is when Hank Paulson, who was the Treasury Secretary, was saying, I can liquefy those toxic assets if you give me $800 billion. Right. Now, of course, they took the $800 billion and just gave it to the banks. They never did any such thing. But what was it that Bush didn't understand about that? Or what was it that Paulson was misrepresenting, or whatever it was?
Well, he was misrepresenting from what I can understand, he was representing what the bill was going to do, what we were proposing. We were going to propose a package where the president thought we were going to, he kept saying, buy low and sell high, buy these bad toxic assets.
Which is what I thought when I was working at CNBC. Well, that's what they were telling us. So you're saying the president was stupid enough to think the same thing I was thinking and everybody else was, which is what we were being told?
Well, I would not say the president is stupid.
I'm kidding. But in other words, the president simply understood the same thing myself as a reporter at CNBC and elsewhere, which is that they need $800 billion worth of taxpayer money, basically to lowball the banks to buy these toxic assets and then ride it out, buy low, sell high, in order to create liquidity. And instead, they used that to get the authorization and then just gave the money to the banks.
Yeah, well, they I don't know what they did lots of different things.
They gave them. Jonathan, you got a question?
Yeah, I do have a question for Matt. You've already been attacked, as other people who have written books that have been critical of the president have been attacked. So I have two questions. One, why should anyone believe the stories that you have in your book? And two, do you think by talking about those conversations with the president that you will send a chill, through future administrations where the president might not trust the speechwriter or a staff member who's in the Oval Office with him or her, and fearful that one day this private conversation, what they think is a private conversation, will end up in print someday?
Well, you know, I think every president is aware that, you know, when he runs for president, you give up a lot of your privacy. And the American people are my boss as well as a president. And I think the American people have a right to know things about administrations. And I'm very candid and hard on myself in the book. I say things that I've done that were sort of dumb or foolish. And it's my story. It's not the definitive book about George Bush.
William McGurn, who is the chief speechwriter, has a piece in the Wall Street Journal today that fairly aggressive in its criticism of you. I want to read it and get your response. Again, this is in the Wall Street Journal this morning. He says bringing him, being Matt Latimer, into the Oval and getting him on Air Force One was a, parenthetically, losing attempt on my part to get the president to warm up to him. These are distasteful things to have to say publicly about someone who once worked for you, and I would have taken them to the grave had Matt not used these props and the snippets of conversation he picked up to paint a highly distorted view of some very good people during some very tough times. Your response?
Well, you know, I like Bill and worked well with him, and he praised my work repeatedly. And some of the things that he's saying in his column are already being debunked. But, you know, I think that the American people have a right to see a perspective from somebody who, I wasn't a fanatic for the president. I didn't hate the president. I was just an observer came from the Midwest, wanted to do something. And
so what's your overall message? In other words, if it's not a tell-all, it's not a kiss and tell, even though it obviously has a lot of kiss and tell aspects to it. But in a sentence, what is your objective in publishing this book?
Well, you know, I think on both sides of the aisle, a lot of people realize Washington is a system that's broken. And we elect people who say that they advance our principles on the conservative side and the liberal side. They tell us what we want to hear, and then they come to Washington, get elected, and they forget. And the power and the privileges and the special perks in Washington pull you away from the values you believe in. And I think people need to recognize that so we can do something about it.
Yeah. Matt, a pleasure. Thank you very much for having a conversation with us.